the war for information and knowledge was put to the test during this war. That's true for the South, but certainly for the North as well. As Sarit said, the challenge is possibly even greater in the current situation in which Israel maintains its presence in Lebanon and Syria. In order to continue discussing how the battle for knowledge and information and the battle for Israel's legitimacy to defend itself and contributes to its defense, I would like to introduce Talia to present, which will be in English. Hello, everyone. I'll take this one step forward. People often say that we don't always introduce ourselves fully. Her name Gali is actually Gali Oz, and my name is Talia Dekel-Fleissig.
And now I'm moving on to English. So good afternoon and welcome. It's an honor to moderate today's panel, Intelligence-Based Diplomacy, How the Legitimacy Effort Will Aid in Preventing the Next October 7th. And thank you to the Alma Center for your partnership on this event today. 10/7 has fundamentally changed Israel's strategic reality. The Hamas invasion and massacre was not only a national trauma, but also a trigger for a broader confrontation. In the weeks that followed, Iranian-backed proxies from Hezbollah in the north to the Houthis and militias across the region, and others, of course, began testing the limits of Israeli deterrence. Israel responded not only with military force, but developed a comprehensive diplomatic and informational strategy as time went on. Intelligence-based diplomacy became a central tool, not just for coordinating responses with allies, but for shaping the international environment and influencing wider public opinion. This strategy included official channels where intelligence and diplomatic echelons worked hand in hand to share threat assessments and engage global partners. But it also extended well beyond government, as we've seen today. Civil society played a crucial role. NGOs, advocacy groups, academics, everyday citizens here and abroad joined the effort, helping to contextualize Israel's actions and counter hostile narratives. These players made strategic use of public communication to push back against the flood of misinformation as well as disinformation. Israel was fighting a campaign led by its adversaries to distort facts, demonize it, and manipulate international opinion. In this environment, intelligence-based diplomacy meant more than quiet briefings. It meant fighting for legitimacy, credibility, and deterrence in both diplomatic halls and public discourse. Following October 7th, Israel is taking a more proactive and preemptive security posture for Israel, one that can be more clearly seen, implemented in its activities in the north. We'll discuss the role this kind of information sharing plays in Israel, the room and legitimacy it needs to carry out its new defense approach in an increasingly complex and volatile region. We're fortunate to be joined by an exceptional panel of experts, and I look forward to beginning this conversation. You guys are there, just checking. Retired Colonel Miri Eisin is a senior fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University in Herzliya. With over 20 years' experience in the IDF, she held a range of senior intelligence roles, including deputy head of the Combat Intelligence Corps, intelligence officer of a regional border brigade, head of the Syria Department in the Northern Command, intelligence officer for the Israeli Airborne Division, and assistant to the director of military intelligence. Notably, in all of these positions, Miri was the first woman to serve in the capacities. Following her military career, Miri served as the Israeli government spokesperson during the Second Lebanon War, and later as international press secretary to Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. She teaches at Reichman University and Tel Aviv University, lectures globally, and serves on numerous boards, including the Alma Research Center, the Devora Forum for Women in National Security, Cyber While Combating Online Anti-Semitism, and the Taub Center for Social Policy Studies in Israel, which she chairs. So you're welcome to come here. Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Avital Leibovich is the director of the American Jewish Committee in Israel, where she maintains relationships with international leaders, diplomats, and policymakers, helping to shape global support for Israel and the Jewish people. Among other achievements in this role, she successfully worked to have Hezbollah outlawed entirely in Kosovo and other countries, hosted dozens of heads of states and ministers in Israel, and contributed to enhancing Israel's standing in the world. She founded and led the IDF's interactive media branch, the first military unit worldwide dedicated to social media, and served as the IDF spokesperson to foreign media, managing the military's relations with international press and conducting thousands of interviews. Since retiring from active duty, Avital continues to serve in the IDF reserves in the Northern Command and contributes her expertise to Israel's national security. Welcome, Avital. And finally, I'll just acknowledge that our third speaker, Gadi Ezra, who was the director of Israel's National Public Diplomacy Unit at the Prime Minister's office, was scheduled to join us, but like many Israelis who simultaneously lead professional careers, was actually called to reserve service in a combat unit several hours ago, so he won't be joining us, but we'll be fine. Is it on? Yeah, great. Okay. So first of all, thanks, guys, for being here. We've talked a lot today about all the kind of issues surrounding, but I'd like to get a sense of your unique personal experiences during the war, vis-a-vis your particular audiences, how and what kinds of information you were sharing with your cohorts, what informed your choices, what were the challenges you encountered, and if you can touch on particular events that maybe stood out more. Avital, we'll start with you.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Alma for having such a successful conference. It's wonderful to be here in the North. I also feel personally connected to the North, so for me it's a treat to be here. On October 7th, I actually was called up to reserve duty in the Northern Command. And for me, this was an asset because, you know, when a war breaks out or some sort of an emergency situation breaks out, the best thing to do from an official perspective or from an advocacy perspective would be to try and influence the narrative. Because if you don't feed the media or the officials or the governments with the right information, with the data, with the numbers, with the facts, with the proofs, then someone else will. So the fact that I was there on the ground gave me the capability to actually give the information out. So what I was doing since October 7th, somewhere late at night at around 9, 10, 11 p.m., I would get into my car with my uniform and would record a video trying to explain what happened on that day in Israel, because, as you know, so many fronts was very difficult to follow. I mean, Hezbollah began on October 8th, the following day, and I tried to give the information. Of course, there was different audiences you needed to address. So I was addressing Jews in the diaspora. And, you know, the Jews in the diaspora, I have to say, I received phone calls on October 7th when people were crying frantically. So this really affected them, even though they were not here physically like us, even though they were not sitting in shelters like us. So this was one audience we needed to address. And the other audiences were media. And of course, tried to make ourselves available for interviews. I was sitting here, BBC in Arabic just texted me for an interview. And of course, were the officials. But here there was a challenge because you could not go to the north. You couldn't go to the northern borders. It was closed. It was not approachable. And in order to have the complete experience, you need the physical presence in the north. So I would say the most urgent thing would be to impact the narrative with the facts, with the numbers, with the data, with the proofs. I think the IDF did a really good job by trying and releasing footage of everything that was done. An example could be an hour ago in which someone in Lebanon was taking out, a senior member of Hezbollah was just taking out an hour ago. He was dealing with the accurate missiles kind of operation. But in the IDF spokesperson explanation, you had the whole resume of the guy, plus the footage. So this is actually a proof of that situation. And without that, it's just sound bites at the end of the day. So I would say that the IDF did a pretty good job on that ground.
Thank you. Miri?
So again, thank you, and it's amazing to be here and in Alma again. Let's think about it for a moment. Let's think about framing. Avital just gave the zoom-out frame, but there's the personal frame. And here I want to take us in that sense to the challenge of, from October 7th, the intelligence-based information persuades, impacts those who are willing to listen to the intelligence-based information. meaning I did that every day, 7 a.m. to midnight for months, talking, giving data, facts, information. That's a type of audience, but we need to be aware it's a type of audience. I hate to put it in numbers. I always like to do a kind of chatach, a line. People 30 and over, I love this audience. Most people here, 30 and under, most people 30 and over will accept the facts. It's a time thing, it's a social media aspect. They're looking in that sense more for what does it mean, what's the facts, you can impact them that way. But when you give too many facts and you're talking on TV and you show too many things, people lose the context. But you know what they want? They want to know all about Miri. They want to know about Avital. And they want to know about Talia. And I'm the one who said that Gadi hadn't introduced herself because it's about the person. And in the intelligence-based information, the challenge is that you lose that personal touch. And I think that for me, the biggest challenge throughout this year and 7 months is not about the information. Oh my God, we've put out so much information, so much more exact, so much better than we ever have before. By far, high points to the IDF. But I'm going to call it out right now. Who is the face of Israel? 1, 2, 3, 4. For the international community on a personal basis. And I would say that the only person in English who spoke on a personal basis in that sense is the IDF spokesperson. Elon Levy was out there for a while and then stopped. And I'm just saying that at the end, people want to connect to people. And even with Elon, that was always my criticism to theirs. It isn't just about the facts and figures. It's about the personal. It's about me sitting in the shelter by myself. It's about being scared or not being scared. And together with that, showing both resilience and strength. And so I'm not contradicting. I'm just giving us our challenges. That when we're talking about this, we need the information. But to me, the intelligence-based information, certainly the last year and 7 months, was mainly focused at decision makers, but not at all of us. When I say not of all of us, not the person at home, not the people at the end who are walking out and protesting against Israel, the ones who are on the streets, the ones who are out there in horrific ways with totally erroneous things. And you go, I want to tell them more information. They don't want information. And if there was one day where I saw the difference, it was that Saturday night? Or we already, yes. When was the Eurovision? The Eurovision, that was Saturday night, where everybody connected to Yuval Raphael on a personal level. In Europe, where we try to get, I'm saying there's that difference between the people level and what you talk about in a personal story, and she won that personal vote, the people vote, the people connected to her, and I give that as an example of the challenges that we face, because it doesn't mean that you don't need to give all of the information and the data, and to make sure that the other side can't do the misinformation, disinformation, fake information. But it isn't enough to be able to change the challenge that we have when it comes to the delegitimizing, which I'm sure we're going to expand upon in a moment.
Is there, I'll just take from what you were saying, is there an overlap between the two worlds? Because on the one hand, we're talking about the information, the numbers, the figures, probably stuff that's more aimed towards the decision makers and more hard diplomacy, whereas, and you correctly kind of aged it, all the other stuff is more relevant for the younger audiences, perhaps those on social media, obviously, maybe younger generations of reporters, things like that. Is there an overlap between the two worlds? How should we be working together? Do the organizations need to work differently with the government? Like, how do you see a kind of an ideal situation of those two worlds coming together?
I'll start, and I'm going to let Avital step in, because this is for both of us an area that we look at. First of all, you can't disconnect today. Anything that goes out is everywhere, okay? It's a question at the end of the echo box that you're in. So we're here at the Alma Center. We've been hearing magnificent different presentations, lectures about what's going on right now. And this is a narrative. I've been sitting, I constantly also to myself as I sit and I push back on different ideas of what comes up. Could I describe it in a different way? I'm very tempted in that sense to show some of those visuals that we haven't been looking at all day. But when we talk about that online, when we're talking online social media, not internet per se, not the information, but when I am having a friend and my friendship is on social media and I'm inside a group and I'm inside my closed social media group, I am only going to see one echo box. It is an enormous challenge nowadays. So it doesn't really overlap. That to me is part of the big challenge, is that you meet people who for the last year and 7, almost 8 months have only seen a narrative, one side of the narrative, and you're appalled, but I have to tell you that's true on both sides. We're not exposed a lot. not to the horrific side of the anti-Israel delegitimizing, but to the other side of this war. Okay, different pictures that we're not seeing that impact those who are talking about the personal and about the people and what it does to people. So I don't have an answer for that, because you need to be reaching out to both.
I would say it has to do with audiences. The question is, which audience are you addressing and what are you trying to achieve? And I'll give an example. I think a few months after the war broke out, I received a phone call from one of the ambassadors stationed in Israel. And she said to me, listen, we need to report to our ministry what is going on in the north. We have no idea. We just don't have a clue. And I said to myself, you know what? I can help. And the following day, I texted something like 10 ambassadors. And I said, if you're interested to hear a briefing about what's going on in the north, here's the Zoom link. And within a few hours, I had 10 ambassadors who were sitting with their notebooks, taking notes, asking the questions which, they lacked to find the information on, and then they could file a report to their ministries. Because at the end of the day, at least from my perspective, as an advocacy organization dealing with diplomacy, my goal is to provide the data so that that foreign minister or that prime minister of a certain country could develop a policy which is aligned with the Israeli policy vis-a-vis Hezbollah, vis-a-vis Iran, Syria, and so on and so forth. So that's one example. Another example is the personal touch, and I agree with you, because at the end of the day, we are here in Israel, and I'm included, are very militaristic. And let's face it, most of the countries in the world don't have mandatory service. So they don't know what a military is, except something they've seen on movies. So how do you personalize the issue? How do you personalize such a strategic issue for us, which is a life and death situation many times? So I can give you an example. A few months ago, I took a group of ambassadors. The demand was really high. We had close to 60 ambassadors from multiple countries, and I took them to the northern border. Now, I could have done it the classic way, namely going to a military base and have a briefing there, and another general comes, and another general comes. Fine. So yes, I had a strategic briefing by a general. But then I decided to invite a mayor, the mayor of the Upper Galilee. And the Upper Galilee, as many of you know, contains 28 communities and towns. Half of them were evacuated. So for a mayor that has 14 of his communities evacuated and they're not returning, their return is not even in sight, just speaking from a civilian perspective. And then we took them to a kibbutz called Kibbutz Shamir, that in 1974, they still have the scars of the terrorists entering their kibbutz and killing 3 women in 1974, even though so many years have passed. So just to understand the mindset of the civilians, the diplomats were very emotional when they were a part of that experience. In addition to this, how do you communicate with the world? Because not everybody is here. So we have brought a lot of delegations. Now, it's not easy to convince people, parliament members and journalists, to take a plane and go to a war zone. It's not easy. And many of them do not want to come, and I cannot blame them for that. But we were successful still with a lot of delegations, primarily from Europe, but not only. By the way, I'm one of those who think that relations with Europe are critical and important for Israel. And I'm not a person who says, Europe is dead, Europe is gone, don't invest in Europe. I'm not with that agenda. And it made a difference.
Very timely, Avital.
Thank you. And when we took those delegations to meet hostage families, and they looked in the eyes of the mothers and the brothers and the sisters of the hostages, it was different than what they've seen on TV. Because as we all know, the international news segment in news programs in TV gets the least rating. Because if I'm living in Alabama, what do I care about what's going on in Aleppo, Syria? I don't care.
I'm going to jump in here and say that the challenges that I'm sitting here, Alma, Northern Front, and we all sat here a year ago in the war itself while it was still going on. And I say that because to me the biggest challenge in this war was to get the focus on to the north. Every single time I was on TV, they talked to me, including now. They only talk about the framing of Gaza. the framing of Gaza. Can I say that like 17
The
times?
Palestinian story, the Palestinian conflict.
But not just that. It's about Gaza. It isn't even in that sense about Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, or that sense. And that you want to go, oh my God, there are other fronts. And when you view Lebanon, when you view Hezbollah, when you view the North through the eyes of what's happening in the Gaza Strip, the threat that was here, the challenge that was here, nobody was reporting on it. Nobody cared about it. And if you don't preempt, what happened is when Israel went on the offensive in the summer of 2024 as a big date, it was a few dates that went in a row. It was after the horrific attack into Majd al-Shams mid-July 2024, but after that Israel and the Israeli forces went on the offensive. The narrative about Israel looking at what we were doing was, why is Israel attacking Lebanon? Why is Israel on the attack? I'm like, where have you been for the last 9 months as we've been talking about what's been happening, about the evacuees? And I give that in that sense that the challenge in a multi-front war is that this war is only viewed through the eyes of the Gaza Strip, including today. And here we are sitting here and talking about this, and what's happening down south impacts everyone. I was listening before to a conversation about Lebanon not inside this room. And they were saying, as long as Israel continues what it's doing in Gaza, nothing's going to change in Lebanon. That was an international perspective. I thought, ma kesher. And yet, here we are, exactly that challenge, and we need to be aware of that. How do we broaden that perspective that not everything is about that things are interconnected, that the Houthis firing at us doesn't necessarily have to do with the Palestinians, and it does have to do with so many other things. That's a challenge that we constantly have. But this issue of the personalization is, the only ones who really like that in the States are Fox, BBC, and CNN. I mean, I do everybody all of the time. But on the night of either the April or the October one, I was live on Fox before the actual attack. And the siren, remember the first time that the pre-siren went off and it was really scary? Anyways.
October 1st.
That was that one, okay? I'm live on Fox. I hear it goes into my phone. I said, I'm live on TV. I said, listen, I'm sorry, I have to go to the I don't have a safe room. And they're like, can you get onto your phone and show us? I think I did better for the state of Israel on that one night than I've ever done. Because I took my phone, and everybody watched me go down. Everybody saw me sitting on the stairs. Everybody heard the noise that I was hearing. That was totally personal. It had nothing to do with anything else. And that personal story of showing, and that was about Iran. And I don't know how to always challenge it. That was actually a very scary night, by the way, because I live near Jlilot, and Jlilot was one of the places that they were aiming at, and one of them fell there that night, and it was no fun, right? Okay? Jlilot. I love being near Jlilot, right? Okay.
We were actually at the Jerusalem Press Club just on the way back from a 1-year anniversary tour that we had done with journalists in the Gaza periphery, and then started getting the alerts to get shelter. And if you remember, there was also a terrorist attack the same day in Tel Aviv.
On the light rail.
Yeah. So I think this is a good segue to kind of the next portion of the conversation that we'll talk about what we have ahead of us, and how the picture looks starkly different in the north now to the beautiful pictures that we had here before, and how we deal with that.
Can they put on those pictures? Can you put on the ones that were the JP? Is that okay to put that in the background? The ones of that we had on in the Hafsaka?
And I just want to reinforce this issue of not being able to maintain world attention in more than one area at a time, because just like the world was all looking at, at All Eyes on Gaza, this was actually something that, in terms of civil society at least, a lot of organizations on the ground in Israel were kind of trying to fill that vacuum of going up north. So while all the groups were down south, if you remember, there were busloads and busloads and busloads of journalists, diplomats down south, a lot of us organizations were able to take the journalists up north. And that was the biggest challenge, trying to explain to them why they needed to still be there. And those who had, larger staff, crews that, ABC and NBC, CNN, they had a few teams here on the ground. They were able to kind of go to different locations, but not everybody has the same budget as these folks, and of course their attentions were.
But there were roadblocks in the entire north. You couldn't even reach the border area, and if you're back, you're not really on the border. You can't really see what's going on. You can understand the Hezbollah is right on the border.
True, but I will say, and I don't often say this, and it's kind of a shame that Gadi's not here to kind of talk about the coordination between civil society and official authorities.
Thanks.
We were able, in several instances, to get special permission from the IDF to reach some of the locations that were blocked off from the general public.
But stop for a sec. I want to call out Talia. Talia had the idea. We were sitting and talking about what we need to do in 2023 before the war in the north, because we didn't know there was going to be a war in the south. And I want you to think about this as different people in the audiences, because what you're saying behind us is something that Talia and I created in the summer of 2023. We said there's going to be a war with Hezbollah, and nobody's going to be able to go to the border. But we're going to want to be able to talk about it. And we took photographer, drones, and we went up to the north. This is in Zarit. None of the buildings on the Lebanese side now exist anymore. We kind of said we do the before and after. But as it goes behind us right now, just to give that idea, this was used, we used this during the war itself. When you're talking about that can't go up north, you prepare something in advance. You can't go down south. And this was prepared in advance. This is in Shtula at the Speaking Walls. As it goes on, you'll see, taken from a drone, from Avivim, from Mizgav'am, from Rajar, all along that border so that you have visuals. Because at the end, people they don't know where we are. They don't know where things are. And in this case, we could show the Hezbollah places, the Hezbollah sites, where they were. And we were doing that all over the world, online, through these pictures. Very important to think about those resources up front, meaning what's the next war and what do we need to prepare, right? Okay, just for us to think about.
I think it's a great initiative, so kol hakavod on that. But I do want to make a segue and talk about the pictures, because this is the problem that we currently have. And, for us here in Israel, we usually, let's put it bluntly, Al Jazeera in Arabic is not the most popular channel for us. And the footage which is shown there, if you just take 5 minutes of your time, any round hour, you open the news and you look at the pictures coming out from Gaza, and these are the pictures which the world sees. And there's a problem here, because these pictures are, eye-catching, they're dramatic, they're everything that a news director would want for increased rating for his program, and there is no contradiction. On the Israeli side, there is no other footage that is being put out there which could maybe divert a little bit or somewhat of the only narrative that exists. I'm not even talking about Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is just one example, but this footage coming out from Hamas cameramen, Islamic Jihad cameramen from Gaza is, of course, spread through the wires all over the world. And this is a huge challenge, which I don't see Israel succeeding with so much. There are different ways to deal with it, but right now, we're beginning to pay a heavy price in our diplomatic relations. And again, this is the connection between the media effect and the political part.
Right, absolutely. I'll just say that there's a huge difference between the two. Again, we're looking at the two different zones, both the Gaza front and the north. And when you're talking about who's left in Gaza to take pictures of what's happening there, and of course Israel's decisions to not exactly allow the foreign press to get into the strip and leave this vacuum that you also talked about at the beginning of the discussion, that's something that we have to be asking questions about. But if we move the conversation back up to the north, because that's why we're here today, and you're talking about the pictures, what are the pictures that we need to be showing them now, given the fact that the message is even more difficult in creating legitimacy for this kind of this defensive war when we have boots in the ground both in Syria and in Lebanon, which is not the case when we filmed these beautiful pictures.
So I'll tell you what I'm seeing, and I want the world to see just the same things I'm seeing. I'm seeing restaurants with great food which are opened in Lebanon. I see beautiful houses being cleaned up and new gardens being planted. In other words, I'm seeing Lebanese people trying to go back to their normal lives. In the north, it's not, obviously, this is the same situation. Only 50% of the people returned. And I'm also seeing something else, very important voices calling out for a change, to seize the opportunity and change, move Hezbollah outside of the government, fire people belonging to Hezbollah who are working in the airports, in the ports, in government facilities, in government ministries. In other words, I see the average person in the street, I see the average news anchor talking about a change, a hope for Lebanon. And with this hope, we need to push forward the narrative. Because you won't see the same pictures in Gaza, obviously, because these pictures don't exist there. And 1.4 million people in South Lebanon evacuated safely when the IDF asked them to evacuate. So there were tiny amount, really tiny, which you cannot even, count really, of civilian casualties. This is not the same thing. But I think we can talk about maybe a shared future, if I'm daring to dream down the line, a shared future which would benefit both countries one day.
I'm going to step in here and say we may be able to do that about Lebanon, because Lebanon has a similar story, meaning we have a Hezbollah, there was a Hamas, we have civilians, we told civilians to leave, they left, a lot were killed. I'm just saying in that sense, that whole issue with the numbers is one that we never know how to address well, but I want to take on Syria. And here I'm going to be taking on the front row as they sat here this morning and I listened, and I'm not saying that what was presented here is wrong, but I'm talking right now from a narrative point of view. Right now, Israel is being presented in the world as the impediment to Syria going forward, not Turkey. Not what Hayat Tahrir Sham was and maybe is, not all of the challenges inside Syria on the ground, not Qatar. No, Israel is presented as the impediment. And in that sense, when I say what I would like to see, I would like us to make clear statements in that sense, which at one stage along the way, the Prime Minister made one of the only very official policy statements that he made at the graduation ceremony at Ba'adha down south, where he said, we will not allow any troops at all, any kind of military arms south of Damascus. It isn't right now if I agree or disagree, but it was a very clear statement. And from that position, it's like, what are Israel's policies, both in Lebanon and in Syria? And in that sense, this is about policies. It's not about intelligence-based information. It's about what are the Israeli policies? Because the one thing that we have not talked about today at all is the impact of Israeli policies. We say we're only in 5 spots in Lebanon. We present that as being a failure of us in what we achieved in the ceasefire. And I'm saying we are in 5 spots in Lebanon. That means that we can be presented as occupying Lebanon. And when it comes to Syria, we can say from here to eternity that the Turks were there before. And we all know that. But I give you the challenge in the narrative itself, in that framework, we share a border with Syria. And what I want to say is that we share a 138-kilometer border with Lebanon. We share an 89-kilometer border with Syria. Both of them have been in a state of war with Israel from May 14th, 1948. It's May 2025, okay? That's a choice they made, not us. And I give it in that sense as I actually want to zoom out into that bigger narrative, because right now, when it comes to Syria, I don't know what their future is, but I'm going to share a border with them. And that lack of clear voices also that I alluded to before, the only voice that comes out of Israel is the military one. And I abhor that. The state of Israel is not supposed to be represented by a military person in uniform. And it doesn't matter if Avital did her job stupendously, which she did, both in uniform and in general. That's not the face of the state of Israel, not even in a state of war. It's supposed to be a face of both government, of policies, of ideas, of a woman, of a soft voice. I could add in onto that one. And we don't have that one there. We do not have that. And that's very much missing when it comes to the voice I want to hear if I was looking up towards the north.
I want to leave a few more minutes for questions from the audience, but I also want to stay true to the topic of our conversation. And of course, I completely agree with you, everything that you're talking about in terms of the person in the front. But at the end of the day, and this is something that we've talked about throughout the day, people do need numbers, statistics, information, and the state at the end of the day has a monopoly on this information. And it's not new in the war that often there's kind of this push and pull between civil society and the official organs to try to gain this information. And it's not always timely. And not all of us have an Alma center in every location across
That's
the
why
country.
we have Alma.
So I think the question begs is, what can we do in the absence of these kinds of organizations when we do rely so heavily on, on OSINT, as you called it before? Because this is reality at the end of the day. Like, how do we bridge that gap when we know that at the end of the day we don't have that access that the government will always have?
I'll start, you'll continue. In today's day and age, we don't actually need the government. I just spent today learning from Tal, from Sarit, from all. How much did we learn this morning about Hezbollah, about Lebanon, about Syria, about what's going on? That's all based on research OSINT. And I say that because there's Alma, and that gives us that answer in that sense up north. And there are other agencies, other organizations that do the research in that sense, and we should look at them. Everybody is agenda-based, and that's fine. Read the about, find out what the agenda is. I think that the challenge is in warfare and fighting, not in that overall picture. Meaning I don't know exactly at that moment exactly what's going on. And that has to do with the war. I don't think I ever expected that I would live through, in the state of Israel, a war of 1 year. What are we at, 593 days? Did any of you think that we would be in a war 593 days? And I say that, and yet we have the information. We managed to create it more and more. So specifically in that sense, I think it's to rely more nowadays, especially on OSINT, but to always ask the questions. But the challenge to me within the information is the picture that goes above, and that you get to choose. So that picture is the one that always impacts.
Avital?
So when you look at polls all over the world, and you look at the different bodies which receive the credibility of the public, you see the government offices at the lower part of the list, but the NGOs are opening the list in terms of credibility. And that's the reason why NGOs are so successful. Alma is one example, AJC is another example. But there are many others as well, of course, JVP. But there are many examples. And the fact of the matter is that it doesn't matter that you're not sitting at that decision-making point exactly. If you have the intelligent people with the relevant requirements, you can do a great job. And we are all a part of this advocacy kind of mechanism, and we're all successful in what we do because we have good people at the end of the day. I do want to point out, just to refer to what you said about Syria, because actually there were a lot of messages given by the Prime Minister. By the way, he said that he's even considering normalizing relations with Syria in December 24. But there were visits on the border in which we heard Minister Katz and Prime Minister Netanyahu and others. Sometimes this has been going on, the Syrian border issue has been going on for 5 months. So this is quite a period of time which is still shaped. We don't know yet what will happen with this Jolani guy and who is controlling Damascus and a few suburbs at the end of the day. It's not the entirety of Syria. So I think sometimes there is this vagueness which a country is permitted to keep. So not always my expectation is to have all the information out there. I think in the case of Syria, it's such an example, because look what happened last week when Trump was in the region suddenly.
So I get a
Jolani is the good-looking guy. It's the good-looking guy who's promising.
But he said handsome guy, but I'm just gonna push back in the sense that when it comes to Syria, the official statements that came out were the military security statements.
Except Netanyahu's first statement, said,
yes.
But the first statement was 4.5 months ago. So we are in this picture a very limited time at the end of the day. So it's okay to wait until we form the policy.
But I'm not talking about the policy itself. I'm talking about the lack of, in that sense, part of the challenge is what is it, but it's how it goes out. And I think that in that sense, we've all created it here today. And in sending out that, what's the message? What's the picture? At the end, I always come back to the picture. Because to be clear to everybody, I'm all intelligence-based. But when it comes to the media, the picture is worth 1,000 words. And we can't forget that. Certainly in the under 30 age, they look at the picture and then they may go in and see a bit more. And those are the ones that we want to influence because they're going to be the future leaders.
I'm actually looking to influence the decision makers. So it's a combination of different audiences. Of
decision
course, we
makers
need to
have
address
children
each
under the age
audience
of
with their
32.
own tools.
The decision makers also have children that follow social media, and that's part of it. I've been told several times that our time is up, so I'm going to have to end here. And if anyone has any questions, you can grab our speakers after the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.